The quiet town of Willowspeak always came alive during Christmas. Streets shimmered with lights, homes glowed with decorated trees, and the scent of cinnamon and pine filled the air. But this Christmas Eve was different. It wasn't the jingling of bells or the warmth of a roaring fireplace that drew people out into the frosty night. It was the wail of fire trucks and the sight of smoke curling into the dark sky. The Miller household, a cozy two-story home nestled at the end of a cul-de-sac, was engulfed in flames. Inside, chaos reigned. Tom Miller had been pulling decorations out of the attic when the fire broke out. His wife, Sarah, had been preparing hot cocoa in the kitchen. Neither realized that faulty wiring in the living room had sparked the blaze until the smoke alarm pierced the air. The couple's panic was immediate. Tom raced downstairs, his heart pounding as the sight of growing flames met him. "Emily!" Sarah screamed, dropping the mugs to the floor. Their 1-year-old daughter was upstairs, sleeping peacefully in her crib. Sarah darted toward the stairs, but flames had already consumed the base of the staircase. The heat was unbearable, the smoke thick and choking. Tom grabbed her arm, pulling her back. "We'll get her out," he said, though his voice wavered with fear. "We have to trust the firefighters." But amidst the chaos, Buddy, the family's loyal German shepherd, had other plans. Buddy had always been more than just a pet. He was a constant companion, a protector, and unbeknownst to the Millers, a silent observer with a keen understanding of his family's every move. That night, as the fire roared and the Miller family screamed in terror, Buddy's sharp instincts kicked in. His dark brown eyes darted from the growing flames to the stairs, then to the terrified faces of Sarah and Tom. Emily. He knew she was upstairs. With a single, determined bark, Buddy sprang into action. The heat was overwhelming as Buddy dashed past the flames toward the staircase. His paws slipped on the hardwood floor, but he regained his footing, leaping up the stairs 2 at a time. Smoke billowed around him, stinging his eyes and filling his lungs. Still, he pressed on, guided by the faint scent of Emily's baby blanket and the memory of her soft cries. Downstairs, Tom tried to follow, but the fire had spread too quickly. "Buddy!" he shouted, fear gripping his chest, but the dog was already out of sight. Sarah clung to Tom, tears streaming down her face. "He's going after her," she whispered, her voice a mix of awe and despair. Buddy reached the nursery door, his fur singed but his resolve unshaken. The room was filled with smoke, and the fire's orange glow flickered menacingly through the window. Emily was in her crib, coughing softly, but too young to understand the danger she was in. Buddy nudged the door open with his nose, then carefully approached the crib. The baby's cries grew louder as Buddy reached up, gripping the edge of the crib with his teeth. He nudged Emily's small form with his nose, and she instinctively grabbed onto him. Buddy then turned to the nearby rocking chair, where Emily's favorite blanket was draped. With one swift motion, he grabbed the blanket in his teeth, using it to wrap Emily securely. Downstairs, the firefighters had arrived. "There's a baby inside," Tom yelled as he pointed to the second floor. The firefighters moved quickly, their equipment hissing and clanging as they began their rescue. But just as they prepared to enter, a figure emerged from the front door. The crowd gasped. Buddy stumbled out of the burning house, Emily cradled in the blanket between his teeth. He moved carefully, his body shielding the baby from the flames and the falling debris. His once shiny coat was now matted with soot, his movements slow but deliberate. Sarah screamed, running toward them. "Emily!" she cried, collapsing to her knees as Buddy gently placed the baby in her arms. Emily was coughing but alive, her tiny fingers clutching the edge of the blanket. Tom knelt beside Sarah, pulling them both into a tight embrace. Buddy sat down heavily, panting as if all the energy in his body had been drained. The crowd erupted into applause, the firefighters staring in disbelief at the heroic dog. One of them knelt beside Buddy, running a hand over his back. "This dog's a damn hero," the firefighter said, his voice thick with admiration. But as the Millers clung to their baby and Buddy caught his breath, a question lingered in the air. How had Buddy known exactly what to do? It wasn't just instinct, it felt almost like a plan. The aftermath of the fire left the Miller family shaken but grateful. Their home, once filled with warmth and laughter, now stood as a smoldering ruin. Yet, in the middle of the chaos, one undeniable truth emerged: Buddy had saved Emily's life. The following morning, the family gathered in a small room at the local fire station, where they were given temporary shelter. Sarah held Emily close, rocking her gently in her arms, while Tom sat across from her, his gaze fixed on Buddy, who lay curled up on a blanket. The dog's normally vibrant coat was dull with soot, and he winced slightly with every breath. "He needs to be checked by a vet," Tom said, his voice breaking the heavy silence. Sarah nodded but said nothing. She was too overwhelmed by the events of the night before. Her mind replayed the image of Buddy emerging from the flames, Emily bundled in the blanket between his teeth. It was an act of courage beyond anything she'd ever witnessed, and it left her with an unsettling question. How did Buddy know to do all of that? Later that day, they took Buddy to the local veterinary clinic. The vet, Dr. Caroline Hayes, examined him thoroughly. "He's got a few burns and some smoke inhalation," she said, running her hands gently over his back. "But considering what he's been through, he's in remarkable shape." Tom exhaled in relief, but Dr. Hayes continued. "This dog is extraordinary," she said, almost to herself. "I've treated a lot of animals, but the precision of what he did, carrying a baby, shielding her from the fire, it's not just instinct. There's something more here." Sarah's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" Dr. Hayes hesitated. "Well, animals, especially dogs, have incredible survival instincts. But Buddy didn't just act to save himself. He thought about Emily first. That level of reasoning, it's rare." As they left the clinic, Sarah couldn't shake Dr. Hayes' words. Buddy trotted beside her, his gait slower than usual but steady. She glanced down at him, her mind swimming with questions. Could it be that Buddy had planned his actions? And if so, how? That evening, the family stayed at Tom's parents' house. Emily was put to bed early, and Tom and Sarah sat in the living room, Buddy lying at their feet. "I can't stop thinking about it," Sarah said, breaking the silence. "It's like Buddy knew exactly what to do." "He didn't hesitate for a second," Tom nodded, running a hand through his hair. "You're not wrong. I've seen trained rescue dogs perform amazing feats, but even they rely on commands and practice. Buddy acted like he knew the house was on fire, like he knew where Emily was." They fell silent again, the weight of the discussion hanging in the air. Buddy stirred at their feet, his ears twitching as if he were listening. The next morning, as Tom sifted through the few belongings salvaged from the fire, he stumbled upon an old folder tucked into a fireproof safe. Inside were certificates and training manuals from a program he had once enrolled in years ago, a canine rescue training course. The sight of the papers brought a flood of memories. Tom had taken Buddy through several sessions when he was a puppy, teaching him basic search and rescue skills. But life had gotten in the way, and the training had been left incomplete. "Sarah," Tom called, bringing the folder to her in the kitchen. "You remember these?" She glanced at the papers, her brow furrowing. "You started training Buddy for search and rescue?" "Yeah, but we never finished." "I thought he'd forgotten it all," Tom said, shaking his head in disbelief. "But last night, it was like he remembered everything." Sarah stared at the documents, her mind racing. "What if he didn't forget?" she murmured. "What if he's been watching us, learning from us this whole time?" It wasn't just a wild idea. Over the years, Buddy had always been unusually observant. He knew the family's routines, often anticipating their needs before they even spoke. When Emily was born, he took to her immediately, standing guard by her crib and barking at the slightest noise. Tom had joked that Buddy thought of himself as Emily's second parent. Now, Sarah wasn't so sure it was a joke. Buddy's behavior became the focus of their conversations in the days that followed. The more they thought about it, the more they realized how deliberate his actions had been during the fire. He had navigated the house with precision, avoided areas where the flames were strongest, and wrapped Emily in the blanket to protect her from the smoke. These weren't random acts, they were calculated. A week after the fire, the Miller family was invited to a local news station to share their story. Buddy sat proudly beside Sarah as the reporter marveled at his heroism. "So, tell us," the reporter said, leaning forward. "What do you think drove Buddy to act the way he did?" Tom smiled, glancing down at the dog. "Buddy has always been part of this family. And when it mattered most, he didn't just protect us. He showed us what love and loyalty really mean." The segment aired that night, and Buddy's story quickly went viral. Messages poured in from around the country, praising the dog's bravery and intelligence. But for the Millers, Buddy was more than just a hero. He was a mystery, one they were only beginning to unravel. As the weeks passed, life slowly began to regain a semblance of normalcy for the Miller family. With the help of friends and neighbors, they found a temporary home and began piecing their lives back together. Buddy, however, remained the center of attention. His heroism was the talk of the town, and even strangers stopped the family on the street to meet the dog who had saved Emily. But for Tom and Sarah, there was still an underlying sense of mystery about Buddy's actions during the fire. The dog seemed unchanged by the attention, carrying on as he always had, watching over Emily, shadowing Tom around the house, and sleeping near Sarah's feet at night. Yet, in quiet moments, Sarah found herself observing Buddy more closely, as if searching for some clue that might explain how he had known exactly what to do that fateful night. One evening, Tom decided to revisit the training manuals he had found in the wreckage. He sat on the living room floor with Buddy lying beside him, thumbing through the yellowed pages. "You know, boy," he said, scratching Buddy's ears, "if I'd kept up with your training, you might have been the best rescue dog this town's ever seen." Buddy's ears twitched at the sound of Tom's voice, and he lifted his head, staring intently at the papers as if he understood every word. Tom chuckled and set the folder aside. "You're already a hero, Buddy. Guess that's all that matters." But the thought lingered. Could Buddy's old training explain his actions? Or was there something deeper at play? The answer came one cold January night when a loud knock at the door interrupted the family's dinner. Tom opened it to find a man in his early 60s standing on the porch. He wore a thick coat and carried a briefcase, his breath forming clouds in the icy air. "Good evening," the man said with a smile. "I'm Dr. Gerald Klein. I heard about Buddy's story on the news, and I believe I might be able to shed some light on his remarkable behavior." Tom hesitated, glancing back at Sarah, who was holding Emily at the table. "Come in," he said finally. "We'd love to hear what you know." Dr. Klein stepped inside and set his briefcase on the coffee table. As Buddy approached, the man knelt, extending a hand. "Ah, there he is," he said warmly. "What a magnificent animal." "What do you mean? Shed some light?" Sarah asked, her tone cautious but curious. Dr. Klein explained that he was a retired behavioral scientist who had specialized in canine intelligence. "Years ago," he said, "I conducted studies on dogs like Buddy, German Shepherds, in particular. They're among the most intelligent and intuitive breeds. What makes Buddy special is not just his training, but his ability to process complex situations and act independently." He opened his briefcase, pulling out a series of documents and photographs. "I've seen cases where dogs displayed near-human levels of reasoning, especially in high-stress environments. But Buddy's story is exceptional. He didn't just act on instinct. He evaluated the situation and made calculated decisions." Sarah and Tom exchanged glances. "Are you saying Buddy planned what he did?" Tom asked. Dr. Klein nodded. "It's likely. Dogs like Buddy are capable of recognizing patterns, anticipating outcomes, and even adapting their behavior to protect their families. His training, though incomplete, gave him a foundation. The rest came from his bond with your family. He knew Emily's life depended on him." The conversation left the Millers with more questions than answers. Over the next few days, Tom couldn't stop thinking about Dr. Klein's words. If Buddy had truly planned his actions, what else was he capable of? And how much had they underestimated the dog they had raised as a companion? The turning point came when a new fire alarm was installed in their temporary home. On the first test, the alarm blared loudly, and Buddy's reaction was immediate. He sprang up, darted to Emily's room, and began nudging her crib with his nose. When Sarah arrived moments later, Buddy was already attempting to pull a blanket over the baby, just as he had during the fire. Tom watched from the doorway, his heart pounding. "He remembers," he said quietly. "He's trying to protect her." This realization changed everything. The Millers began paying closer attention to Buddy's behavior, and what they saw amazed them. He was hyper-aware of his surroundings, often noticing things before they did, like the faint smell of gas when the stove was accidentally left on or the sound of a distant car pulling into the driveway. It was as if Buddy had taken on the role of the family's silent guardian, always alert, always ready. The community, too, continued to celebrate Buddy's heroism. The local fire department held a ceremony in his honor, presenting him with a medal and declaring him an honorary rescue dog. Cameras flashed as Buddy stood proudly beside Tom, his tail wagging as if he understood the significance of the moment. But amidst the accolades, Tom and Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that Buddy's actions carried a deeper meaning. He wasn't just a hero. He was a reminder of the unspoken bond between humans and animals, a bond built on trust, loyalty, and an understanding that transcended words. Then came the biggest test yet. Late one night, as a heavy snowstorm blanketed Willowspeak, a power outage plunged the neighborhood into darkness. Tom lit candles and built a fire in the living room to keep the family warm. Sarah was upstairs with Emily when Buddy suddenly stood, his ears pricked. "What is it, boy?" Tom asked, following Buddy's gaze toward the front door. Buddy barked once, low and insistent, then ran to the door, scratching at it. Tom hesitated but decided to trust him. He grabbed a flashlight and opened the door to find a man huddled in the snow, shivering violently. His car had skidded off the icy road, and he had wandered toward the nearest house in search of help. Tom quickly brought the man inside and called for Sarah. Together, they wrapped him in blankets and gave him hot tea. As the man regained his strength, he looked down at Buddy, who sat calmly beside him. "That dog saved my life," he said, his voice trembling. "If he hadn't barked, I don't think I would have made it." That night, as the family settled back in, Tom sat beside Buddy, running a hand through his thick fur. "You're something special, you know that?" he said softly. Buddy leaned into him, his brown eyes calm and steady. For the Millers, the snowstorm was another reminder of Buddy's extraordinary gift, not just his intelligence, but his unwavering commitment to their safety. They didn't need to understand it fully to appreciate it. Buddy wasn't just a dog, he was family, and in their darkest moments, he was their light. Winter slowly turned to spring, and the Miller family began to rebuild their home and their lives. The events of the fire and Buddy's heroism had left an indelible mark on them, but life, as it does, carried on. Buddy had become a local legend, celebrated not just for saving Emily, but for his ongoing acts of vigilance and loyalty. For Tom and Sarah, however, the true measure of Buddy's greatness wasn't in the medals or the media attention. It was in the everyday moments that revealed his quiet strength. One afternoon, as the family walked through the construction site of their new home, Emily toddled ahead, her tiny legs wobbling with each step. Buddy stayed close to her side, his sharp eyes scanning every movement. He had adopted the role of Emily's constant protector, never straying far from her. Tom often joked that Buddy acted like a nanny, but deep down, they both knew it was more than that. Buddy had bonded with Emily in a way that defied explanation, as if he understood how precious and fragile her life was. The climax of Buddy's journey came unexpectedly. It was a warm April evening when Tom smelled something strange in the air as he sat on the porch. The scent was faint, almost imperceptible, but it carried a warning that made his stomach drop. Buddy, lying at Tom's feet, suddenly perked up. His ears twitched and he stood, his body tense and alert. "What is it, boy?" Tom asked, following Buddy's gaze toward the street. Buddy barked once, a deep, commanding sound that Tom had learned not to ignore. Without hesitation, the dog took off down the driveway and toward the main road. Tom called out to Sarah, who was inside with Emily, and grabbed his jacket. "Buddy's onto something," he said, his voice tinged with urgency. "I'm going to follow him." Sarah nodded, trusting the dog's instincts as much as her husband did. Tom hurried after Buddy, who was now sprinting toward a small wooded area just beyond the neighborhood. The closer they got, the stronger the acrid smell became. It was smoke. When Tom finally caught up, he saw what had drawn Buddy's attention. A small camper parked at the edge of the woods, its back half engulfed in flames. Two children stood a few feet away, crying and clutching each other as the fire grew. "Stay back," Tom shouted, running toward the children. He quickly assessed the situation, realizing the flames were spreading too fast for him to reach the camper safely. But before he could act, Buddy darted past him, heading straight for the vehicle. "No, Buddy, stop!" Tom yelled, but the dog was already at the door, which hung ajar. Inside the camper, a third child was trapped, coughing as smoke filled the small space. Buddy leapt inside, navigating the cramped quarters with remarkable agility. The child, a boy no older than 5, was huddled in a corner, too frightened to move. Buddy reached him and nudged his arm with his nose, barking to get his attention. When the boy didn't respond, Buddy gently grabbed the back of his shirt with his teeth, pulling him toward the open door. Outside, Tom watched in awe as Buddy emerged, the boy clinging to him. The dog guided the child down the steps, his movements steady despite the chaos around them. By the time the firefighters arrived, Buddy was sitting protectively beside the 3 children, his body positioned as a barrier between them and the growing flames. That night, as the Millers gathered in their temporary home, Tom couldn't stop replaying the scene in his mind. He didn't hesitate, he told Sarah. It was like he knew exactly what to do, just like with Emily. How does he keep doing this? Sarah smiled, resting a hand on Tom's arm. Because that's who Buddy is, she said simply. He doesn't think about the danger. He thinks about what matters. He thinks about family. The days following the rescue brought a new wave of attention to Buddy. The local news covered the story extensively, and the children's parents, overwhelmed with gratitude, called Buddy their guardian angel. For Tom and Sarah, however, the real reward was knowing that Buddy's actions had once again saved lives. He wasn't just a hero to them. He was a hero to everyone who knew his story. The resolution to Buddy's tale came one quiet evening in late spring. The Millers were sitting on the porch of their rebuilt home, the scent of fresh wood mingling with the crisp night air. Emily played with a small ball on the grass, laughing as Buddy nudged it back to her with his nose. Tom and Sarah watched in silence, their hearts full. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Tom turned to Sarah. "Do you ever wonder why Buddy is the way he is?" he asked. "Why he seems to understand so much more than we expect?" Sarah thought for a moment, then shook her head. "I don't think it matters why," she said. "What matters is that he's here. He's part of our family, and he's shown us more love and courage than we could ever ask for." Tom nodded, his gaze drifting back to Buddy. The dog was lying in the grass now, his eyes fixed on Emily as she played. There was a calmness in his posture, a quiet assurance that everything was as it should be. As the stars began to appear in the night sky, Sarah leaned into Tom, her voice soft. "Buddy reminds us what it means to love without limits," she said. "He doesn't need words or explanations. He just knows." Tom reached down to scratch Buddy's ears, and the dog looked up, his eyes filled with an intelligence and warmth that needed no further explanation. For the Millers, Buddy wasn't just a pet. He was their protector, their companion, and the embodiment of the simple yet profound truth that love, in all its forms, can move mountains or run through fire. Buddy closed his eyes, his breathing slow and steady as he rested beside the people he had given everything to protect. And in that moment, the Miller family knew that they were complete, not because of what they had lost, but because of who they had by their side. Years passed, and the Miller family's life flourished in ways they could never have imagined. The rebuilt house became a home again, filled with laughter, milestones, and memories. Emily grew into a spirited and compassionate young girl, her bond with Buddy unshakable. Wherever Emily went, Buddy was never far behind, a constant companion through scraped knees, school bus rides, and bedtime stories. But time, as it does, moved forward. Buddy, once a bounding, energetic dog, began to slow down. His once glossy coat turned gray around the muzzle, and his steps became more measured. Yet, even in his twilight years, his watchful gaze never wavered, especially when it came to Emily. One crisp autumn evening, the family gathered in the living room, a fire crackling softly in the hearth. Emily, now 10 years old, curled up beside Buddy with a book in hand, reading aloud as he rested his head on her lap. The scene was one of peace and love, a snapshot of a bond that had defined their lives. Do you remember that first Christmas? Tom said quietly, looking over at Sarah. How could I forget? She replied, her voice soft. He saved our family that night. He's been saving us ever since. Tom nodded, his gaze shifting to Buddy. The dog's eyes met his, filled with the same steady warmth they'd held since the beginning. We've been lucky to have him, Tom said. He's taught us more than we could have ever taught him. The seasons turned, and one spring morning, Buddy lay peacefully in his favorite spot under the oak tree in the backyard. The family surrounded him, their hands gently stroking his fur as he drifted off, his breathing soft and even. When the moment came, it was as if Buddy knew he was leaving his family safe, loved, and ready to face the world without him. The years that followed were filled with stories of Buddy. His medal still hung in the living room, a reminder of the dog who had been more than a pet. Emily, now a young woman, carried his lessons with her, his courage, his loyalty, and his unwavering love. She often told her friends about the Christmas when her guardian angel had run through fire to save her, and how that same angel had watched over her every day since. And though Buddy was no longer at their side, the Millers always felt his presence. In the quiet moments, when the house was still, they could almost hear the soft pad of his paws or feel the gentle nudge of his nose. Buddy wasn't just a memory. He was a legacy, a testament to the extraordinary power of love and the unbreakable bond between a dog and his family. As Emily stood by the oak tree one evening, the sun setting behind her, she placed a small plaque at its base. It read, "Buddy, our protector, our hero, our heart, forever loved." The wind rustled through the branches, carrying with it the echoes of a life well lived and a love that would never fade. Thank you very much for watching the video to the end. If you were moved by the story of the canine hero and the spirit of Christmas that transformed lives, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and share in the comments what you thought of this exciting journey.